February 13, 2024, News Report 1. News began circulating on Twitter that the scam group in northern Myanmar had killed 4 Chinese police officers. The incident occurred in May last year, when the Linsang Public Security Bureau dispatched 4 police officers to infiltrate the tiger's lair in Myanmar. The estate is a base for a telecommunications fraud gang, and their mission was to obtain evidence of the crime and rescue the victims being held captive. Tiger's Lair is controlled by Ming Xuechang and is one of the earliest places to engage in telecommunications fraud. The park has 4 large buildings, is militarily managed, heavily guarded, and armed militants are stationed there. After entering the fraud park, the 4 police officers engaged in telephone fraud activities with others. In early October last year, Ming Xuechang felt pressure from China and began to transfer personnel from the park. He transferred high-performing personnel to pull numbers and low-performing personnel to mines. On October 20, during this transfer process, the 4 police officers organized several thousand people to escape, but due to the other side being armed, the escape failed, resulting in more than 70 deaths. The identities of the 4 police officers were also exposed, and they were all buried alive. This incident prompted the Chinese government to begin cracking down on this Myanmar fraud group, which is backed by the Myanmar military government. The Chinese government mobilized the National Security Forces and 3 armed groups to attack these fraud parks, ultimately forcing the Myanmar military government to arrest the leaders of the gang and hand them over to the Chinese police. The entire process indicates that these fraud groups have been operating in Myanmar for over a decade, and the Chinese government should have taken action long ago, but they have failed to effectively combat them. News Report 2. Data released by the U.S. Department of Labor shows that the Consumer Price Index, CPI, in the United States in January was 3.1%, higher than the market's expected 2.9%. The CPI for December last year was 3.4%, although it dropped to 3.1%, the decline was significant, exceeding expectations. The core CPI, excluding food and energy prices, was 3.9%, higher than the expected 3.7%. The core CPI for December last year was 3.9%, which remained stable, but the January data showed an increase beyond expectations, indicating a strong job market and strong consumer spending in the United States. Due to the CPI data exceeding expectations, the market expects the Federal Reserve to postpone its rate hike plan, possibly until the second half of this year, around June or July. This has led to a decline in the 3 major U.S. stock indexes, a short-term rise in U.S. Treasury yields, and an increase in the U.S. dollar index to 104.66 points. News Report 3. According to CountDesk data, on February 12, the price of Bitcoin rose to $50,000, an increase of 5.58%, the highest price of Bitcoin since December 2021, reaching $50,196. As of 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time on February 13, the price of Bitcoin was $48,800. Bitcoin has risen 16.3% so far this year. Analysts believe that one of the reasons for the rise in the price of Bitcoin is the approval of Bitcoin ETFs by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Since January 11, 9 Bitcoin ETFs have been listed, attracting $9 billion in inflows, pushing up the price of Bitcoin. In addition, analysts predict that with the listing of more Bitcoin ETFs, $100 billion will flow into Bitcoin ETFs this year, effectively flowing into the Bitcoin market. On the other hand, the market expects Bitcoin to split in April this year. Bitcoin was born in 2009 and new Bitcoins are mined through blockchain decryption. According to this issuance mechanism, every 21 million Bitcoins mined, the miner's reward will be halved to slow down the growth rate of Bitcoin. Bitcoin having occurred in 2012, 2016, and 2020, which usually leads to price increases. For example, on May 12, 2020, the day of the Bitcoin halving, the price of Bitcoin rose by 2.9% to $8,821. This halving mechanism is entirely based on the principle of supply and demand. News Report 4. According to Bloomberg, MSCI announced on February 13 that it had removed 76 companies from the MSCI China Index. This change will take effect after the close of trading on February 29. The companies removed include Guiyang Bank, Huaxi Securities, Golden Eagle Group, Greentown China, Southern Airlines, and Ping An Health, among others. The number of stocks removed this time is the largest in the past 2 years, involving industries such as real estate, technology, retail, and healthcare. This move reflects the market's pessimism about the Chinese stock market. At the same time, MSCI China Index added 4 companies, including China Merchants Expressway Network, Sci-Tech Medical, Ningbo Samsung, and medical giant Jidun. Analysts pointed out that investors are steadily reducing their exposure to China due to weak economic fundamentals, unstable financial systems, and regulatory uncertainties. Some investors may have incurred losses or are reducing their investments in Chinese stocks. News Report 5. The U.S. Senate passed a $95 billion aid package in the early hours of February 13 with 70 votes in favor and 29 votes against. The bill includes $60.1 billion in aid to Ukraine, $14.1 billion in aid to Israel, $10 billion in humanitarian aid to Palestinians, and $4.8 billion in aid to Indo-Pacific allies such as Taiwan. The bill has caused divisions within the Republican Party in Congress. Former President Trump and House Speaker Johnson encouraged Republican senators to vote against the bill, but 22 Republican senators still voted in favor. Johnson issued a statement on the evening of February 12 stating that the U.S. House of Representatives would not convene to vote on the aid package, but the bill could be passed through a procedure known as a discharge petition. The discharge petition procedure allows the bill to be brought to a vote if it collects signatures from a majority of House members, i.e., 218 members. Currently, the fate of the bill is uncertain, with aid to Ukraine being a core component of the bill. News Report 6. The 6th European Council on February 12 passed a resolution to use the interest generated from the frozen assets of the Russian Central Bank to aid Ukraine. Since the outbreak of the Ukraine war, the United States and the European Union have frozen $300 billion of foreign exchange reserves of the Russian Central Bank, with about $50 to $60 billion in the United States and the rest in Europe. The European Settlement Bank is one of the financial institutions where the Russian Central Bank holds the most foreign exchange reserves. According to the European Settlement Bank, the interest generated from these frozen assets amounts to about $4 to $5 billion annually. The Council of the European Union issued a statement stating that it will use these interest payments to aid Ukraine in supporting its reconstruction efforts. The relevant funds will be transferred to the Fund to Aid Ukraine through the EU budget. News Report 7. According to the Korean Central News Agency, a delegation from the Workers' Party of Korea departed for Russia on February 13 to participate in a forum against neocolonialism. The forum is hosted by the United Russia Party, the party led by Putin, which holds 76% of the seats in the Russian State Duma. The delegation from the Workers' Party of Korea is led by Kim Soo-gil, secretary of the Pyongyang Municipal Party Committee, and this visit is a further exchange following the meeting between Kim Jong-un and Putin last year. It is expected that the cooperation between North Korea and Russia will continue to strengthen. Meanwhile, a tourist group from Russia arrived in North Korea on February 9, the first group of foreign tourists to visit after North Korea opened its borders, not from China but from Russia. News Report 8. According to the South Korean newspaper Chosun Ilbo, last year, 5,750 Russians sought political asylum in South Korea, a 4.5-fold increase. The number of applicants last year was equivalent to the total from 1994 to 2019. The most common reason Russians apply for asylum in South Korea is political, as they do not want to serve in the military or participate in wars, as well as religious and racial issues, among others. However, obtaining refugee status in South Korea is not easy. From January 2014 to May 2023, a total of 85,000 people applied for asylum in South Korea, but only 2% ultimately succeeded in obtaining refugee status, a success rate far below the average of OECD member countries, which is 24%. After Russia invaded Ukraine, Putin issued 2 mobilization orders requiring young men to enlist. As a result, large numbers of Russians fled to other countries after the outbreak of the war. According to Forbes estimates, by 2022, between 600,000 and 1 million Russians had left China. News Report 9. Erickson, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense at the U.S. Department of Defense, stated at an Atlantic Council event on February 12 that China and Russia are pursuing economic, political, and diplomatic interests in Latin America and the Caribbean, posing core risks and threats to the United States and its allies. Therefore, the U.S. Department of Defense must adjust its strategic priorities and deal with challenges from these regions. He emphasized that the U.S. Department of Defense will enhance cooperation with the military of Latin American and Caribbean countries, including joint collaboration in air, land, sea, space, and cyberspace. In addition to military partnerships, the U.S. private sector, industry, and relevant agencies will also cooperate with countries in Latin America and the Caribbean to ensure their security needs are met. Erickson stated that countries in Latin America and the Caribbean must take measures to protect their national security infrastructure and only use products from trusted suppliers to avoid bringing military benefits to China. He also expressed hope that countries in Latin America and the Caribbean will actively engage in the U.S. agenda to jointly address challenges from China and Russia. News Report 10. According to the United Daily News, Chairman of the U.S. House China Strategic Committee Gallagher will lead a delegation of 6 congressmen to visit Taiwan on February 21 and meet with Taiwan's President-elect Lai Ching-te and Legislative Yuan Speaker Han Kuo-yu. Gallagher is a hardliner on China and leads the National Policy Committee of the U.S.-China Council. He has proposed 10 recommendations for Taiwan policy, including rapid delivery of military weapons, expansion of joint U.S.-Taiwan training, and incorporation of these recommendations into the U.S. National Defense Authorization Act. Gallagher secretly visited Taiwan in February 2023 and met with President Tsai Ing-wen and Defense Minister Chiu Kuo-jang, among others. In addition, according to Voice of America, Gallagher issued a statement on February 10 stating that he will retire on January 3, 2025, and will not seek re-election. In his statement, he pointed out that Congress should not be a retirement place for people, and politics should not be a profession. Gallagher stated that he will enter the private sector and spend more time with his family. His future work will be aligned with national security goals, namely preventing World War III and preventing war between the United States and China. Gallagher, 39, was first elected to the House of Representatives in 2016 and has been re-elected 4 times, making him one of the youngest committee chairs in recent years. As for the reason Gallagher is not seeking re-election, some believe it is because he voted against impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas on February 6, which goes against the wishes of the Republican leadership and has offended some within the Republican Party. However, Gallagher denied this, stating that partisan politics and turmoil in the domestic Congress were not the reasons for his decision to retire. News Report 11. According to the Korean Meteorological Administration, during the Spring Festival, Chinese people setting off fireworks and firecrackers caused severe air pollution in South Korea. From February 10 to 12, the sky in South Korea was gray, with a PM 8.5 value reaching 75, which is considered severely polluted and harmful to human health. The Meteorological Administration pointed out that the main cause of air pollution in South Korea is the setting off of fireworks and firecrackers in China, with large amounts of pollutants being blown to the Korean peninsula by westerly winds. During this year's Spring Festival, many places in China set off fireworks and firecrackers, including in urban areas, on a large scale. On New Year's Eve, PM2.5 in China had reached severe pollution levels, with high PM2.5 levels in cities such as Harbin, Dalian, and Jilin, which was extremely serious. The Central Meteorological Observatory forecasted that China will experience 2 cold air activities in the next 2 weeks. The first one will arrive from February 13th to 15th, and the temperatures in the middle and lower reaches of the Yangtze River and northern regions will generally drop by 4 to 8 degrees Celsius, with some areas in the northeast dropping by around 14 degrees Celsius. The second cold air will affect northern regions from February 17th to 21st, with a temperature drop similar to that in Korea and North Korea, dropping by 6 to 10 degrees Celsius, with some areas dropping by 12 to 16 degrees Celsius or even 18 degrees Celsius. After the end of the Spring Festival, China will experience drastic temperature drops, accompanied by complex weather conditions such as strong winds, floating dust, rain, snow, and freezing rain. The temperatures will fluctuate, and meteorological experts remind everyone to pay attention to weather changes and take various preventive measures, including wearing warm clothing and ensuring travel safety.